Okay, everybody, welcome to today's webinar, 12 o'clock Eastern, 9 o'clock on the Pacific Coast. We hope that if you're with us here on the East Coast, you've got some lunch with you. If you're with us in California or somewhere on the West Coast, you have a cup of coffee. My name is RJ Jenkins, and this webinar is called Academic Success in the Grip, How to Be a Good Student When Things Are Tough. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. My name is RJ Jenkins. I'm a curriculum designer at the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Dean Stephen O'Connell. Steve, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon, good midday, everyone who's joining us. As RJ said, my name is Stephen O'Connell. I'm an assistant dean of students at Columbia University, the School of General Studies, the undergraduate college for non-traditional students, students that are returning to their education at a time in life other than right after high school. So I work with undergrads, advising, working on academic support and transition. And I myself am a non-traditional student. I graduated from Columbia as a non-traditional student. So I know a little bit about what it's like to come to your education at a different time in your life. And I'm so glad to join you here today.
I'm really happy to have you. Full transparency, Steve is now a colleague of mine, but when Steve was an undergraduate student, he was an advisee of mine. And I taught a course called University Studies, which was a sort of extended orientation for non-traditional students. Steve was in that class. And so we've been talking about these topics for a really long time. So Steve, thank you for your time today. I want to jump right to it because we're not going to keep everybody for the whole hour. We want to respect everybody's time. But I want to start with, Steve, just to talk to you a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground. These last 18 months have been challenging. We know that. We're not going to kick that dead horse, right? We know that it's been a challenging time. What I think is unique as we walk into the fall semester, and we're talking to students across the country, some of whom are walking back onto their campuses, some of whom expected to go to campus and are going to stay virtual. There's a whole range of different ways that this looks for students. But I think the one thing that's consistent, no matter where you are, is that I think we kind of thought that this thing we're all managing would be done or would be closer to done. And I think over the last couple months, we've suddenly recognized that, in fact, that light at the end of the tunnel that we saw, maybe it's still there, but perhaps shining a little more dimly than we expected as we move into the fall term. And I think that's got some people, turned around a little bit. I think we sort of committed to the idea that last year was going to be what it was. And now as we look at this year, it too is looking a little bit different. Is that what you're seeing with your students as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of folks that were really excited to be back on campus. And now that we're back on campus, it doesn't quite feel like we sort of expected. There's certainly vaccine is available. There's mandates around that. There's different ways that colleges across the country are managing that. Universities are managing that. There are ways of social distancing, wearing masks. There's all sorts of things that are in place in different ways in different universities. Here in New York City, we're obviously a very densely populated campus, densely populated city. So these things really do come into play, and we're just not beyond it in the way that we thought we might be. This is very much still a reality as we all come back together. And I think one of the things I'm seeing is that a lot of folks are really excited to be back on campus, and that sort of goes across the board. Folks are just excited to be together again on the lawn, in the libraries, in the classrooms, even with some of the restrictions that are still in place. People are just happy to be back. But I'm also seeing, folks that are really benefited from some of the ways that education changed in the past 18 months. There are still some remote aspects of education that are here to stay longer than we thought, and maybe here to stay forever. I'm meeting with a lot more students over Zoom, and I think a lot of advisors and faculty are continuing to meet with students over Zoom. That might just make more sense for folks' schedule. Hop into a Zoom meeting, get to business, and then be able to carry on with your day from your work, from your home, from the kids that you're taking care of. But on the other hand, we're also able to be back in the classroom together for lecture, for discussion. So, I think we're really looking at a time where people are excited to be back. There's aspects of this that are here to stay longer than we expected them. And we're also trying to figure out which aspects of this new sort of education model that we're living in are actually really beneficial and we're excited to keep around. And I think everybody's struggling with that. Students, administrators, faculty, everybody's sort of very much in the middle of figuring those pieces out.
And this seems to me like an important moment to sort of really foreground this observation that you've made at the very end, right? This notion that sort of that students are experiencing this return to campus, or this quasi return to campus, or this sort of this sort of continuation of a virtual or distance environment, whatever it is that's happening at your school or your community college or wherever you are. This is an environment and a situation that your faculty and your administrators and students are all sort of interacting with in real time. I mean, is that also, do you think that's important for folks to keep in mind?
I absolutely think that it's important to recognize that this is a rare instance on a university campus where there's this huge experience that everyone is going through together, regardless of your position within the university. And it doesn't come around all that often. Faculty sort of experience their world together, and they come into the classroom and interact with students, but they do so from the faculty position, administrators likewise, and students likewise. We all sort of come to the campus environment, whatever that looks like, where you are from our position within the university. And this is this sort of universal experience of going through this transition back onto campus, quasi back onto campus, somewhere in between, fits and starts, and everybody is experiencing it together as a human being, regardless of what your title is or your role is or what you're trying to accomplish. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind as this feels really uncomfortable at times, as this feels really frustrating at times, confusing, as there's questions of, how am I spending my time at this university, or this college on this endeavor? It's a good reminder that this is a moment where we're all coming to this as human beings and trying to figure it out day by day.
That's awesome. And again, I think this is rare. It's not every day that students and their professors are experiencing the same thing in some of the same ways, right? So I think everyone giving each other and themselves a little bit of grace is important. But before we talk a little bit about sort of the actual strategies that a student might use as they think about the upcoming semester, no matter what situation they're in, you and I had a conversation the other day, Steve, and you very astutely, I think, recognized that this looks really different depending on where you are in your trajectory, right? I don't think to think about this as sort of every college student is experiencing this in the same way is to misunderstand or to sort of ignore that how a freshman is experiencing this and how a junior is experiencing this, or a second year and a fourth year. That really changes what this has been like and sort of what's at stake. Would you mind just kind of outlining that for me? Because that was kind of eye-opening for me.
I think it's a really important thing to remember and definitely not always obvious to the outside of the university world. And we talk about, oftentimes people figure out where they are in their college career, their university endeavor as freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. That might make sense for where you are in school. It also might not. As a non-traditional student, those titles or designations of degree progress, they may not really distinguish what degree progress you've made. But regardless, there are students that are coming into the university for the first time during this in-between phase. Are we back on campus? Are we remote? Are we somewhere in between? Are we hybrid? There are students that are right in the middle of their degree progress, and they started on campus in pre-2020, and were really cooking along in a way that made sense, that we know was a way that that university was set up, and then they had to go remote, or then they had this big pause, and now they're coming back. Then there's a whole group of students that had their entire time on campus, and then their final year and a half was remote, and now they're moving into the workforce or going on to their next endeavor, graduate school, the workforce, what have you, and they bookended their time in school with, in this remote during the pandemic time. And so the point here is that each of those groups of students experienced the interruption to their education in a different way. And therefore, each of those groups of students are experiencing this partial return in a very different way. And I can definitely see that it's impacting students in certain ways. I'll give you an example actually from this morning. I met with a student who was feeling not great about their academic record during the pandemic. And they were not feeling good about how they had done in terms of the online learning that we were in, the Zoom learning. There's a lot of other stressors in their life in terms of their family and health. And of course, this past year has been just a litany of things that folks have experienced. But they still have about 2/3 of their degree left to go. And we were able to finish that advising conversation really positively, knowing that, folks are going to judge this period of my academic career based on it happened during the pandemic. And now I've got a chance to really do things differently as we come back and things sort of shift into this next phase. But that's not every student has that opportunity. And they're really thinking about, okay, maybe this is my last semester. Maybe this is my first semester. Maybe I've just graduated and I'm thinking about my next steps. Everybody is experiencing this in a different way and may not look back on that time during the pandemic and be able to say, that's in the past, I'm able to move forward. Mistakes may be a little bit different depending on where you are in your career.
And I think this is such an important thing for, I think advisors really get this because they're in communication with students all the time. I do think that for faculty, this is an important thing to really keep top of mind as they interact with students. For some students, this return to campus, even a partial return to campus, is going to be really euphoric, right? For others, and I remember you mentioning this, students are coming back maybe after an entire year or 3 semesters or 2 semesters remote, and they're having to have a completely new orientation because what they were oriented to initially was a very different environment. And you said something really interesting, Steve, that the sort of on-campus informal networks of advising that exist between students, right? These sort of invisible channels of communication, advising, and support, those have sort of atrophied a little bit over the last 12 to 18 months. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, RJ and I were talking about the institutional knowledge that lives within the student body, sort of this invaluable wealth of information and experience that can't really be codified. It can't really be written down. It just lives within the student body. It's just a amorphous experience and knowledge that's passed down to new incoming students as they orient themselves, as they come onto campus for the first time. And that's been going on for generations of students, right? Your upperclassmen pass down information, most really useful, some not so useful, right? But students are always passing on really important and a lot of information to each other based on their experience on campus. Right now, the heat map has flipped over. The number of students on campus that have had experience here in the past are relatively very few. Many students, no matter what university you're at, finished their degree during the remote phase and didn't have an opportunity to pass that information on. And many students graduated, many students have moved on. So the students that had on-campus experience went remote and are now coming back. So that's a relatively small group of students when you think of the number of students that either started or are starting now and are coming to their campus, coming to their university life for the first time. So That sounds, I think, as I explained it, a little bit grim, but it's meant to acknowledge the fact that there is a massive group of students on campuses across the spectrum that are all learning how to navigate, are all picking up their institutional knowledge in real time for the first time, and there isn't a wealth of that that they're able to pull from right now that maybe they would have in the past. That wealth of knowledge doesn't exist. But what that means is that the next group of students that come in are really in for it. They're going to have a group of students ahead of them that know a lot and have had to do a lot on their own together, kind of fits and starts, experiences, trip up here and there, but they're going to have a lot of knowledge to pass down.
And I think the flip side of that too, Steve, is that it's not even so much that students have less information than they used to have. It's that the data set that they have is a different data set, right? Mm-hmm. So this group of students that have been socialized into higher education over the last 18 months could absolutely walk a new group of students through the ins and outs of remote and distance learning, right? So that it's sort of like it's less about sort of amounts of knowledge and more about the types of knowledge that students have. I mean, I would argue that these students that are coming out of this sort of remote phase are among the most resilient students we've ever seen, because they've had to do exactly these things. But I do think you're right. You know, you come back to a campus, partially, fully, whatever it is, and there is this brief moment where it's kind of new to everyone at the same time, which I think is sort of unique.
I think that's such a great point. And I think that those students, like you said, those resilient students that have been through this, they're the ones that are, this is the direction education is going in, right? We're never going to go fully back. So those students, you have now a much wider range of experiences than the previous group of students that are going to be much more valuable in the long run.
Yeah, and it's funny. I met with a student a couple of weeks ago, and he was sort of tongue in cheek about this discourse around on-campus versus remote, because he's been a remote student from the very beginning. His community college offers primarily remote classes and night classes, which he thinks are fantastic because it allows for him to accommodate the other responsibilities in his life. He's providing childcare, he works full time, et cetera. And so he, in sort of a gentle and warm kind of way, feels like some of this is a little bit precious, right? That, I mean, of course people take online classes. Doesn't everyone want to take online classes that sort of fit their lifestyle? And so I think the spectrum is even larger than we sometimes realize. I want to, Steve, just turn the conversation now to this sort of notion that two things. One, the world, again, I think we've all been operating, at least I have, under a little bit of a mythology that there would be a kind of restoration or a return to normalcy. That return to normalcy, I think, one, it's a little further out. Two, I'm not exactly sure what normal is going to mean. We're certainly, I think everyone's giving it a good college try to try to move in that direction. But two, I think students come back this fall, partially, fully, whatever, maybe just a little worn out. I mean, I really want to acknowledge for students, faculty, and staff the kinds of fatigue that I think are invisible, but that are very much in operation here. So we have a little bit of a fatigued student body, a resilient student body, a group of students who know what this is like, who were hoping for something maybe a little bit different. And now we're looking at the fall semester. What kinds of things can students do? What are just a couple of things that they can, tricks and tips, ways of thinking about their academic life that can help them sort of feel restored, rejuvenated, and ready to succeed? Because I've talked to a couple of students, many students, in fact, who are having a little bit of trouble feeling like what goes on in these classrooms is easy to prioritize when these other things are going on in the world. When they're seeing some of the things that they're seeing on the news, when people in their family may be sick or managing health issues, where we still have this sort of foundational uncertainty that's coloring the texture of everyday life. So in just sort of broadly, as an academic advisor, as I believe a student yourself, right, who's still pursuing a master's degree and doing this same thing at the graduate level, what kind of advice would you share with students about how to change the mindset around the return to try to maximize your success as we walk into the fall?
Yeah, I think this is really important. I think this holds true every semester, but definitely in a time like this, really try to control the things that are in your control. And when you start a semester, there is this opportunity. It's tricky, it's a puzzle, but there is this opportunity to control how that semester plays out based on the number of classes you choose, the types of classes you choose, the times of day in which those classes meet. That is not exclusively, sometimes there's requirements, there's prerequisites, but largely in this control of the student, one of the beauties of college life is being able to control that schedule. There are times when it's worth taking that early morning class because the professor is awesome, or you're really trying to become a morning person. Maybe not this semester. Maybe this isn't the time to do that. There are times when taking 4 or 5 courses, all of which are going to challenge you in a different way, is important. You've got to make some progress. You're pursuing this degree for a reason. You're paying for it. You're probably making a sacrifice to do so. And you want to make sure you're getting the most, meaning you want to challenge yourself and really make sure every class is a major learning experience. Maybe give yourself a break in 1 or 2 of those classes this semester. Maybe take a class that's very squarely within your wheelhouse. Maybe take a class that's very squarely within your interest and is something that you've got a little bit of background on already. Just to give yourself a little bit of grace. This degree is no matter where you are, no matter how many classes you're taking, no matter where you are in your life, getting this degree, making this degree progress is hard enough on its own. It's hard enough during the best of times. This is not the best of times. So when you have control over those little pieces, your class selection, when they're meeting, the number of credits you're taking, the number of courses you're taking, give yourself a little bit of a break. Maybe a break that you typically wouldn't give yourself because you want to push yourself, and know that it's okay to do that this semester. That's a legitimate academic wellness personal strategy that an advisor at Columbia is saying that's a good way to move forward.
Such good advice, Steve. This is such good advice. And it reminds me too, there's something incredibly therapeutic, I think, during times when you feel like you have so little control, to exert it where you can, right? I think that's such good advice. And I also love this formulation that, if you have a little bit of elective credit toward your degree, taking something you're going to enjoy is not some sort of cop-out at this moment, right? This is a wellness strategy, right? This is an academic resilience strategy. This is a persistence strategy. And also, talking a little bit about academic escapism, right? In a moment where the world is a little bit difficult to process, a university education, I wouldn't normally say to students, you should think about your academic training at university as an escapist exercise. I don't think that's a productive way to think about college overall. But at this moment, I do think that there's something really meaningful about escaping into your coursework, right? I don't know that right now, it might be nice to pull the focus away from some of the other things going on in the world. And by the way, let me just say, there's tremendous privilege sewn into this idea, right? Not everyone is in a situation to do that. Not everyone's in a situation to take the art history class or the biology elective that they want to take. There are students who are very, very much in a position where they have things they need to take, but where there is space to do a little bit of this, I think it really makes sense.
I totally agree. Noting the privilege baked into that and that this isn't available to every student. If you do have a chance this semester to take a course that will allow you to focus on the love of learning, the love of the material, just the escapism, as you put it, RJ. I think that that's worthwhile this semester, and is a really sort of a wonderful opportunity that comes up in education from time to time. You know, if you're studying statistics, you can't look at the news right now without being bombarded with statistics. Right. That's important too. If you're studying political science and you're paying attention to the media, your coursework is going to come up in your brain. If you're studying biology or chemistry, really any of the health sciences, again, that's coming up in real life every single day. If you're studying the humanities, oftentimes you're being asked in the classroom to make connections to the context of the present day, to the context of the human experience today. Well, maybe sometimes you can study a little bit of art history, study a little bit of mythology or literature of some kind, or British literature, and just study those for the love of learning, for the escapism. You know, is this something that we would say every single semester? Probably not. Is this, you know, at the crux of the true value of education and advancing your career or your life long term? Maybe not. But for right now, for resilience, for wellness, for keeping yourself motivated and excited and happy, learning on campus, one or two classes of this type of studying, I think that's okay right now. I think that's more than okay right now.
I couldn't agree more. I love this idea, you know, when we talk about giving ourselves some grace or giving our faculty some grace, we normally mean that in a little bit of an esoteric type way, but you just said something wonderful, right? Give yourself a little academic grace. And this isn't just about course selection either, right? You mentioned your meeting with this student earlier who was being really hard on themselves about their academic performance during the pandemic. We're allowed to hold ourselves to high standards for sure. But again, I think giving ourselves some academic grace really extends even beyond our course selection to just kind of rethinking what it means to have been successful in this environment. It may be the case that being enrolled still, or completing credits each semester, that those things constitute success right now, and I think that's okay.
I totally agree. You know, we get caught up a little bit in academia around GPA or around grades, around, you know, checking off the boxes of your degree requirements. And it's important to, you know, look back at your transcript, look back at the decisions you made throughout the last 18 months, 2 years, and moving forward. And remember that those were moments in time that reflect a specific 4 or 5 month semester period, moment in time. And that's not the whole picture. It doesn't tell the whole story. And going into this next semester, knowing that however this goes in terms of grades, in terms of progress, knowing that this is going to be a moment in time, control what I can control and be able to do my best with the other pieces. And then I'm going to move forward. Yeah.
It's interesting too. So I want to talk about two other things here really quickly. One is this notion that this pandemic has been challenging, but and I don't know how to say this without seeming weird, but maybe you can salvage this thought, Steve. But I mean, there's always going to be really hard stuff. It may not be this thing, which has been exceptionally hard and which has been global in scale and which has had very, very meaningful and serious consequences for people across the country. But also difficulty comes in many forms. And so I was talking to a student the other day, and they had a very interesting, this is since I spoke to you, Steve, last week, that the student has really tried to understand this moment as a kind of training ground for succeeding amidst adversity. And this was a student veteran. You're not going to be surprised to hear that, right? That this was the sort of way of, this was essentially an obstacle course for this student. Recognizing again that people have been touched very differently by this. And for some people, it's been completely earth-shattering, and for others, it's been almost a curiosity. So that spectrum of experience exists. But this student basically said to me, he's not under the illusion that adversity won't visit again in a different form. And so this feels like a useful opportunity to train some of those muscles. How do you respond to that way of thinking about this?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I'm not surprised to hear that that's a student veteran, that type of thinking and framing of the problem as an opportunity to learn. I think I love that as a way of approaching a semester. I think each new semester can be a new adventure, good or bad, challenging or not, streamlined, straightforward, or little chaotic, little haywire. That's often what happens on during a semester is best laid plans get a little mixed up as things go through, and that's okay. I think that thinking about it as an obstacle course is really helpful. And in terms of how this really challenging moment relates to a semester, remembering and knowing that every semester, just like an obstacle course, comes to an end. Eventually it comes to an end, it wraps up. And you may look back on that and not be psyched about how it wrapped up, but there's always lessons to be learned.
Yeah.
Every single semester, whatever the context, whether it be a pandemic or otherwise, that semester was taken in, you can look back on that semester and say, what decisions really led me in a great direction? What decisions made a little bit of a hiccup? And then what was out of my control and I wasn't able to pivot or make a change. The same way on an obstacle course, right? You look back and you think about, where did I take a left, should have taken a right, what have you, and then what got thrown at me that I couldn't predict, and then regroup and make the next best decision for the next semester. So maybe as you start this very, very strange, unique, challenging, somewhere between reopening semester that we're going into right now, fall of 2021, take some lessons from your past semesters and think about those. But also know that, okay, no matter what happens, I'm going to come out the other end of this a little bit more resilient, a little bit stronger, a little bit with a couple more skills under my belt.
I think that's a nice reframing of the analogy. I did say to this student, the wrinkle that I added is that yes, that's cool. Yes, this is an obstacle course. Yes, this is an opportunity for us to train our adversity responsive muscles. But it's also probably not a semester to stress ourselves out additionally if that's not how we're approaching this, right? I'm reminded, I don't know if you remember, Steve, back when the pandemic first started, and there was this profusion of sort of social media chatter about the fact that if you weren't learning to bake artisanal bread, and if you didn't redecorate your living room, and if you weren't learning Italian, and if you didn't walk out with a watercolor series, that somehow you had failed at lockdown, right? That you had failed you had wasted all this time. And there was this sort of thing where to use this moment as a way for self-betterment or for achieving projects was productive. It also created this back formation of ugly sort of shaming, that if that's not how you thought about it, you were somehow failing. And I think that's the one danger of the sort of obstacle course metaphor, is that for the student who's like, you know what, I'm just going to tread water out here, that student somehow feels like they're not meeting the bar. And so that's the one danger. If treading water is what you're capable of doing, then tread water. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense.
It totally does. And I think that's always present on campuses. When you look around and the comparison becomes our enemy.
Right.
This student is doing an internship, taking 4 classes, and is on an athletic team. This student is the president of the club, and working part-time, and those comparisons become our enemy every semester, and no more so than right now. No more so than early in the pandemic, where some folks were just trying to make it through the day with their kids were learning online. They were learning online. They were holding down their job part-time, full-time, and they were expected to, learn how to make the greatest sourdough bread from starter. And that's what their social media was telling them. And I think that's true every semester, and definitely right now. definitely as you enter into this fall semester is it's not about it's about what you do all together. When you put all of your puzzle pieces together, when you put all of your puzzle pieces of your life, being in college, pursuing your degree progress, being one of those puzzle pieces, a lot of those other things are invisible to everybody else. And there's a lot of things that you're going to see in other people that they're doing that looks really attractive and fun and exciting. And remembering to take those moments and say, you know what, I hadn't imagined doing that myself. I didn't even know that was an opportunity. I didn't even know that was an option. I'm going to put that into my bank for maybe some other time. But it's not a knock that I'm not doing that right now. Right. I'm doing the right things for me in this moment.
That's great. I want to wrap up with a move toward, I think, so we've sort of identified one, you know, as in terms of strategies, right? One, really be mindful about what the semester looks like and control the things that you can control, while also trying to give yourself a little bit of academic grace. I sense a blog post coming on for us, Steve. I love this idea of giving oneself a little academic grace. And then two, talking about, you know, is this an opportunity to sort of train yourself in adversity, and is it also okay to not think about it that way? I think both things make sense depending on where you are, as long as you're having an honest conversation with yourself. I think the third strategy, and again, this may seem sort of intuitive, but I don't know that everyone really takes this seriously enough. And for me, it's around communication. And as an advisor, I remember being your advisor, being an advisor at Columbia, saying this to students. I know that this is now at the heart of the work that you're doing. But I want to talk about communication in two ways. One, I want to talk about proactive communication during a moment like this, because I think it's never been more important to be really proactive and communicative with the people who are in place to help you. But two, a kind of intuitive communication in the sense of building a team around you. You know, partial reopening, full reopening, remaining remote, lack of institutional knowledge among the student body. There's still a little bit of isolation that's kind of lingering in this moment, despite the fact that we may be physically together. So I think it's more important than ever that we, and again, you know, a lot of the folks we're talking to are transitioning service members and student veterans who have been socialized in this idea of a team, right? That you do things together, that you have buddies, you have teammates, and you cooperate in order to achieve something. So that's a lot of things, but one, proactive communication, and two, team building. What would you say as an advisor to students?
Absolutely. I would say faculty and administrators alike are educators and teachers at their heart. They want to hear from students. No matter what university or school you're in, folks are in the business because they're educators and they want to work with and hear from students. And they're best equipped to help, to support, to guide if they're hearing from you. So again, I would say any semester, but particularly, RJ, as you said, this semester, communicate, send that email, schedule that meeting. If you have 10 or 15 minutes, go to those walk-in hours, connect with your faculty, with your administrators, with your advisors, make sure you're having those conversations.
And let me break this down just even further, if you don't mind. Look at your syllabus for every course you're taking and schedule a meeting with your professor 2 weeks before every paper.
Yeah.
Or 2 weeks before your midterm, and just schedule those meetings today. And I'm going to tell you that your faculty, when they receive an email from you requesting a scheduled meeting 2 weeks prior to a major assignment, they're already, their heart is going to swell at that kind of proactivity. It gives you a little bit of accountability to your professor. It shows to your professor that you're thinking long-term about your academic responsibilities, and it creates a connect for the two of you that I think, one, can be very valuable, and two, actually gives you something to talk about. So, I mean, that in terms of hard advice, in terms of strategic things you can do this afternoon. Take a look at your syllabi, identify 2 or 3 important evaluative moments, and request time with your professor prior to those.
Absolutely, RJ. And I would even go as far as whenever those walk-in hours are listed weekly, put them in your calendar now as a recurring event. That doesn't mean you go every single week.
Right.
But then when you do, when you know you need to go or you want to go, you don't have to go searching for them. They're in your calendar. So you know where they conflict, you know where they don't. Not every single week you're going to go to walk-ins, but put them as a recurring event all the way through the semester. And then any week you wake up and you're like, you know what, I got to check in with that instructor. You know right when and where they're meeting. It's
a great idea. You were going to say something else and I interrupted you. I think it was about building a team.
Yeah, building a team. You know, I would say this group of students in this moment in time have so much experience with using technology. There's so many ways to meet with your classmates these days, work with them on assignments, go over your notes, go over your papers, collaborate in so many different ways, depending on what the class calls for. In the past, we might have thought a lot about, how do we schedule that time that we're all on campus at the same moment? We can all meet in this coffee shop or this library. Where does our schedules all fit together? Well, you know what? Maybe we don't have to do that anymore. Maybe just a 15 or 20 minute Zoom call. That's a group meeting. That's group study. It can happen in the evening, in the morning, in the middle of the day. Not everybody has to be physically present. Our lives are complicated. Folks are dealing with a lot of different things. So maybe think about trying to meet with your classmates, but not limiting yourself to having to meet in person when that's really hard to schedule. Use the technology to your advantage and prioritize just meeting in a group. Talking with your classmates about the material can just be so helpful. Make sure you're doing that this semester.
That's great. And that's also a little bit of a corrective to some of the sort of isolation, I think psychological isolation and other kinds of isolation that we've experienced. I also think it's important to, just a sort of final thought on this, I think, and I say this, we've done several webinar discussions, Stephen. It doesn't really matter the topic. This still comes up over and over again. And that is the notion that reaching out to your support network, whatever that looks like. So that support network may be your academic advisor. It may be a professor you have a special relationship with. It may be a person at your Veteran Resource Center. It may be a person in the Office of Disability Services. It may be someone in psychological and wellness services. It may be someone in a local chaplaincy. It may be someone at your VA. Whatever your support team looks like, whoever constitutes that, it's always really cool to reach out before you're in distress. So even just this afternoon, if you haven't been in touch with those people who you know are in place to help, just drop them a note to let them know that you're back on campus or that you're back in classes. Those sort of connections before you actually need something from someone, I think are incredibly productive. And that doesn't mean you don't also reach out when you do need help, but a little bit of outreach before you need help, I think can be really productive. Do you agree, Steve?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, it's never been too long, right? I think sometimes we feel like, I haven't been in touch with this person in 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years. I don't know that I can be in touch with them now. And I would say from the perspective of a university administrator, all the folks that RJ listed, we don't really think about time in that way. I'm equally as excited to hear from a student that I met with last week as I am that I haven't heard from in two semesters or 2 years.
Yeah.
Go ahead and reach out, send that email, and clicking send on that, setting up that conversation can just be really, really restorative, and can be a real boost and reminder of the team you have around you. Don't ever think it's been too long. Don't let that stop
you. Dean Stephen O'Connell, colleague and friend, there's really nobody I like talking about academic support with more than you. Your students are so fortunate to have you as a resource, and I just want to thank you for your time today. This has been a really cool conversation.
RJ, thank you so much. I love doing this. I hope we do more. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, RJ, and with the Veterans Center here at Columbia University. I'm so glad to connect with all of you across the country, maybe across the world. And good luck this semester. Hang in there. You got this. And keep in touch. We're the CVTI is here to help.
This has been academic success in the grip. In the grip, by the way, just meaning in a difficult situation. And it's okay to be in the grip, and it's okay to reach out for help. Again, my name is RJ Jenkins. I work for the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. If this conversation lit a fire in you, or raised a question for you, or made you think that there's some sort of support you might need, or if you're a higher education professional who wants to build some of this kind of support on your own campus, please reach out to me at rjj9@columbia.edu. That's COLUMBIA.edu. rjj9@columbia.edu. Again, thank you, Steve, and thank you everyone for joining us.